Hello, listeners. This is episode 73 of our talk. And today I have a very special guest, someone I wanted to have a conversation with for such a long time. So let me introduce you to Leah Smithson. Do I say that right? Lee or Leah?
Leah.
Leah. Leah Smithson is a Los Angeles-based artist using both traditional paint, ceramic sculptures, and new media. She makes, for instance, digital installations, virtual, augmented, and extended realities, and to explore the human condition using portraits that mirror an emotional state or frame of mind rather than the likeness of a person. She's been interviewed and had her work featured in a variety of print and digital magazines, including LA Times, and she's also exhibited throughout the US and abroad, including the award-winning outdoor digital art exhibition Luminex, as well as collaborated with brands like tech giants as Apple and public art installations. Welcome, Leah. I'm really happy to have you. Finally got you as my guest.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very, very happy to be here with you. Finally, we get to talk.
Yeah, it was since 2019 we just figured. So I followed you since then, for a long time. And I was very curious, not only to your process, but also how your exploration into the human condition and what sparked that interest in you.
Well, it's interesting that I feel like as humans, we're just very complex beings. And I've always been interested in being able to portray how we feel or a state of mind. I feel like sometimes when it comes to us humans, sometimes we just tend to draw a lot of conclusions based off of appearance. And sometimes, and then also one thing that my family experienced too was with my father. He had a very major stroke, and with the stroke, it was on the left side of his brain, and what it did was it gave him he ended up with a condition called aphasia. And what aphasia is, it's a condition. There's different variations from it. His was very severe, but I liken it to if I don't speak Chinese and I go to China and people are talking to me, I still have my intelligence. I just don't have the vocabulary to speak back to them. And that's what aphasia did. It just took away that language. And so, but he still had all his intelligence. So I think from there, I began really wanting to understand and explore the idea of intelligence, of human, of our inner selves, outside of language. What does that look like? How can we make that intangible tangible?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I've heard from that. People see a book, but they can't express that it is a book. But they know it is a book, but they can't pair the language to it, right? That's aphasia. Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. That must be devastating when you can talk, but you can't talk, express it. Yeah.
Right. But you know what's really interesting about the human brain? So here in the US, insurances, all that kind of is really kind of crazy. And I'm sure it is, of course, in all over the world. But so it was hard to find a speech therapist that could really grasp what was happening and the extent and have the patience to work with him. There was one woman that we finally found that was able to use music therapy. And the interesting thing about music is, since the stroke happened on the left side of his brain, that's generally where our just which sits, but our creativity, our music, and that all those types of parts of us generally is on like the right side of the brain. So with music therapy, what they were able to do after he wasn't able to speak for 2 years, just 5 minutes working with this woman, she was able to start rebuilding those synapses back, where he was, by singing the language, they're singing in
Yeah.
English, it
Yeah.
was starting to rebuild those synapses. But unfortunately, just because of different circumstances, we weren't able to continue to work with her at the time.
Mm.
But anyway, it just really impressed upon me how important that creative side is. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't have, that's not where the seat of the language sits. So sometimes we just take it for granted, but it's extremely important in our development. And so just exploring those parts of our mind and how they relate to us and our inner person is really fascinating to me.
Yeah. And that shows in your art, because I've seen things that have like, okay. Yeah, especially your animations are stunning, where you see these heads and they kind of merge into each other and then come out, and yeah,
Mhm.
they have an expression, and they don't have, their eyes are closed and then their eyes go open, and then a third one comes in, and very, very interesting. Yeah, it is also a very philosophical approach to art, yet inclusive,
Mhm.
because you use reality. I mean, we understand a portrait, some people um, understand it. If you have conceptual art, you can only understand it when you read a book about it, and the whole explanations they have about why they make a peanut butter floor, for instance. But still, I can imagine that people being mesmerized like I was. I sat there Saturday and I had like, okay, look at from this side. And how, okay, again, what do I see?
Mhm.
So at one hand, it's questioning, and and on the other hand, it's mesmerizing. And how are the engagements you have with people when they see your work?
Yeah, it's always fun because for me, of course, and you're an artist, so I know you know it's like you sit with a work for a long time and it has a certain meaning for you. But then when other people see it, it may have a completely different meaning for them.
Yeah.
Or a lot of times with that particular animation that you're talking about, I get people who are like, wow, like excited. I get some people who are like, that's a little scary.
I can imagine that. Yeah.
But so it's kind of like what their personal experience is, like they put they're influenced by it in their own way, because they're different person, had different experiences in life. But generally it's fun, and I love seeing people have their own meaning to it.
Hmm.
And yeah, so
Yeah.
that's really fun.
Yeah. And since the explosion, because I've seen you, and we go into that later, but I mean, there was interaction, was like live interaction. But since the explosion of new technologies, I see you run with it, and our frame of mind has definitely changed.
Yeah.
Everything. How do you, as artists, explore this experience that yourself?
Mhm. So it's interesting. I've always been interested in technology, in addition to doing painting and, like sculpture, things like that. I also have a background in graphic design, so I'm used to like
Mm.
using the computer and things like that in the design process. And then after COVID, I, I was I was working on an art show that I was going to release, and then COVID happened. So that went away. And that's when I decided to explore, really lean into the technology. I had time, we couldn't get out as much. And I took that art show that I was going to do and I created a virtual reality version of it. And since we were all cooped up at home, what I did was was able to take the art out into parks or really weird, interesting places in
Hmm.
California and set up the art, and using your iPad or your tablet or your smartphone on YouTube, you were able to feel like you were somewhere else using virtual reality. But the thing is, with that technology, I also wanted people to be able to see the pieces as if it was in their own home. So I also worked with augmented reality. So that was like the first movement into that. And then since there, I've just been really like exploring it more and more.
Yeah. Is that still a thing, augmented reality?
Yes, yes. So in fact, last year, downtown Los Angeles, in their, I don't know if you consider it a financial district, they call it downtown center. It's where there's a Broad Museum, Mocha Museum, the Disney Concert Hall. That's a pretty famous building by Frank Gehry. It looks like somebody took sheet metal and then just like crumbled it up.
Yeah.
It's massive.
Yeah.
So over there, to get more people walking around that area, especially after the pandemic, especially after a lot of some of the rioting that happened and things like that, to kind of really encourage more playfulness in the downtown area. They had a walking tour utilizing augmented reality, sometimes with having to do physical art, public art rather. Sometimes it takes a lot of time or there's a lot of restrictions, but with augmented reality, we were able to transform that part of the city into more of a playground where they can discover and look at that architecture from a new perspective. And so that's what they did last year. And then we're also working on a project this year with that.
Just in between, I was thinking about that. You see, we went from like what you see behind me, paintings, they hang on the wall. And now you see people walk in the museum like this. They have
yeah.
So
for sure.
and then you have these immerse yourself. So you can sit somewhere in a big hall and all Van Gogh is on the walls, on the floors and everything. What are your thoughts about that?
It's interesting. It's funny because even though I work with technology and augmented reality, I still really love painting. I still love that the feeling of things. I also do love the fact that technology can also take it I hope to create like a transcendence on top of it and an elevated appreciation for what's the physical world, not replacing the physical world, and so that's kind of what that extended reality means, is it's the blending of both our real world and our and technology, having like that little layer to give you like a heightened experience.
Yeah. Don't you think that having that heightened experience is because we live in a very hyper world? I mean, I can enjoy sitting in a museum and stare at a painting with my own eyes.
Right.
I don't have so, but I have the feeling that people want more and more and more because their senses are working overtime and they are quickly bored or something and they need more and more and it needs to go deeper. And you think that's one of the reasons that this happens?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. It's funny, like I have my nieces and nephews, and of course they grew up with social media and all these types of things. And even they just need to they turn off social media and they just don't touch it for a few months. And I find more and more people. So I agree with you. I do think that there's like more and more, but I do think that sometimes you do just want to sit with your own eyes in a place and just take it in. And so I see that technology not really, I don't see it as a competing with the real world. I see it more as chocolate or vanilla or strawberry. Or sometimes you have Rocky Road and the Rocky Road is like the heightened experience, but maybe you just want vanilla today, and that's okay too.
Yeah. So in a way, you bridge the gap between the analog and the digital, right? So, and in what way do you, and what way do you combine them, and where, in the end, lies the emphasis for you personally?
So it sort of depends. It depends on the subject. It depends on I think it kind of depends on the subject, where the work is going to be. So it's just kind of like, the way I think of it is, if I'm going to do a painting versus a sculpture,
Mm-hmm.
or if I'm going, and so sometimes it may be like, I may have a painting, and maybe there'll be an augmented reality overlay over, that connects with it, that can even further the idea. For example, when I did I did Luminex last year. So the theme for that particular piece, it was called WAGME, which is an acronym for We're All Gonna Make It, that's used in the Web3 community. And the idea is almost like hope. So instead of thinking of all these technologies as competing with each other, they kind of have that saying, like WAGME, like we're all going to make it. It's all going to be good, like, to keep the peace and the hope. And they're hoping that technology will make life better. So that was the name of the piece. But in my work, and as we are as humans, things are not always only good. There's like two sides to the coin. And so with the piece, it was the digital animation, and I worked with Aura Now Art and Panasonic to do a projection installation on a building that had windows. And on these windows, these avatars were trying to push through the screen. So usually we look at our avatars, we control our avatars, and they do what we want to do. So, but this time our avatars had their own autonomy, and they were looking at us, and they were pushed into our world. And the idea was that more and more, especially we saw this during the pandemic, we are influenced by what we see online, and we make very important decisions based off of things that we see online versus old school traditional media like the news or books or things like that. And so with this, that's kind of what it was talking about. And so people were able to just walk around with their own eyes and kind of enjoy that projection installation, but it could only be for one day. And so later that week, what I did too was to extend that installation, and also to give a different dimension. I had an augmented reality overlay on that building, so you could see a little bit like a different version of what those avatars were doing, but this time they were able to break out into our world. So they were like crawling on the walls into Los Angeles and things like that. So that's kind of like that different dimension that art piece could take versus maybe some of the traditional methods I use.
Yeah, and coming to that, when I read about it's not the likeness of the portraits, I immediately received, and now too, in what you say, the avatars start to do their own thing. I have like, I don't want to see myself there doing something that I don't want to do. But I received the Matrix image, that one man that can multiply in thousands of him. And even you and I, if we are at that side in the film, we can transform that person. And that digital form of them lives in a totally other life. Has the movie inspired you in any way? The Matrix?
You know what? I haven't thought about it. I do like sci-fi. When I think of us as humans, and what has become natural for me is thinking about that push and pull between these different emotions and the way we feel, or the way we try to center ourselves when we're like full of lots of different emotions, lots of different thoughts, lots of different decisions that we have to make. And so that's where that multiplicity comes from. And then, like in that particular animation you referenced earlier with the one. Yes. And so it's like trying to regain and find balance.
Yeah. And do you think through your research that you found that the world with all the technology is heading into that direction with blockchain and avatars, that at one point I probably see myself somewhere and I think, excuse me?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. There's a lot of talk, in addition to all this new technology coming, there's a lot of talk about, I'm sure, well, there's things like deep fake where somebody can
Yeah.
take a video and make it look like it's you, and it sounds like you, but it's not you at all. And
Yeah.
so it's like having how to have ownership over your appearance now that
Yeah.
other people can take it. I mean, we've had that with photographs, but it's very
Mm.
new with like video and
Yeah.
things like that. So yeah, it's a lot of layers there. But what's interesting is that with this technology, as far as like you were talking about, where is it going? The idea is that since we as humans, we're used to our three-dimensional world. And so right now with the internet, everything's two-dimensional. But like maybe in a few years, instead of us looking at a screen and it's just our two little heads here talking, it'll be like some form of three-dimensional type situation
Mm-hmm.
where I can, like, I'll give you an example. Like there's a technology, for instance, it's like a version of a metaverse, but it's just a room that you can have. So instead of like somebody going to your Instagram and just seeing a grid of pictures, you actually can create a space and have the pictures hanging on the wall. And when a person is moving through the space, it feels more of like them walking through the space. So instead of pressing pictures on a grid, it mimics that physicality of like
Mm-hmm.
moving through the space and looking at the picture and then
Yeah.
clicking on it and learning.
Yeah. Wow. It's a lot. Yeah. And how well, you see behind me, I am the oil painter, old
Yeah.
master type still.
Mhm.
How detached do you think are we from the world as we knew it? And what implications do you think that has? And what can your art do? Because we talked about you bridge the gap between the analog and the digital.
Mhm.
What power does your art have to make people aware that we're still here? We're
Yeah.
humans. We have a
Right.
picture that we can, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think that's something that I'm definitely exploring. I love nature. So I live in the
Mm-hmm.
city, but I love nature. Like it's interesting, like just driving through the hills and the mountains after being in an intense city, like you can just feel the relaxation. I could feel the relaxation like pour over my body.
Yeah.
So that's why I do feel like it's important for me in my practice, at least, if I am doing so much digital, which I do think that it's absolutely valid for artists that are just exploring the digital. I like to bring things into the real world, even nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what one project that some projects that I'm working on, that I would like to do, that take that digital. I mean, a lot of times we may pull out our phones anyway, but I do try to make it to where like some of the works that I am now developing, I would like it if a person just wants to just sit and enjoy where they are and take it in, that they can do that. If they want that extra experience, leveraging the digital on top of it, they can enjoy that too. But yeah, you're right. As far as like that feeling of detachment, it's interesting with technology, with that, because on the one hand you're on the other side of the world. We would never get to meet each other, but we get
No,
to
no,
using this technology. But
that's
on the
true.
other side of the
Yeah.
world, it's just balance. I mean, on not
Mm,
other side of the world, but on the other side there's balance. It's kind
mm,
of like we also got to get out and meet some people around us.
yeah. Yeah.
So it's kind of like, in that one sense, it can broaden our mind and create relationships, and we can get to know people that we never would normally get to know. But then on the other side, we have to physically, like to physically go to Amsterdam or, you know, where you are as well. So, you know, that
Yeah.
type of thing.
Yeah. Way back when we for the first time talked, I've seen an art installation you showed online, and you let the people throw with paint on a mural you prepared. I really found that so fun. And this must be a very engaging experiment, like literally on the spot,
Mhm.
where you can have great conversations with people.
Mhm.
Is this something you still do, or if not, maybe long for?
Yeah, absolutely. I did that like right before the pandemic. I think that was 2019 as well. So it's been a long gap since I was able to do another mural like that, but I'm definitely interested in doing that as well. It's just that in all these situations, I think the commonality is us engaging with each other, like
Yeah.
either by the use of technology or in that situation was egg and pigment powder, but it was
Yeah.
food safe pigment powder.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Does it still exist, the mural?
Oh, that mural. You know, that poor little mural has been through so much through the pandemic. It was done at a brewery, and that brewery, they had to like take it was on a wall that they put
Yeah.
up, and they had to take it down, and they had to fix like pipes and stuff in the ground, and then
Mm.
they put it back up, and then there was the pandemic and the brewery wasn't open. So it had a decent life. Usually the murals there, they like change them out like every year. That one's up for a good 3 years. And
Mm-hmm.
so I have good pictures of it, so and video. So
Hmm.
it's documented. So in that sense, that's its longevity. But yeah, it's physically
Yeah,
not up.
that's a shame. And on the other hand, it also has something, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like you had to be there.
Yeah, exactly. And but let's briefly go into your sculptures, your ceramic
Mhm.
works. I mean, I think your sculptures are ceramic, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's
And I've seen a few on your website, and I absolutely love them.
oh, thank you so
Do
much.
you still do that? Is this
Yeah.
something that, and is there connection between that and your current work, your more
Mhm.
digital approach?
Yes, I feel like it's I did the sculpture work before I started doing like the animations like I do now, but to me they're all related. Like
Mm-hmm.
just that same idea of a frame of mind or emotion, that being the portrait instead of it being like a perfect portrait of some particular person.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, and at that time I was working on a series where I had like organic, like flowers and leaves grow through the eyes and the face
Oh, I
and
remember that. Yeah.
yeah, and those things represent um resilience
Mm-hmm.
because you know those leaves and grasses and things, they can grow through concrete if you leave it. So that's what that represents, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll definitely will be circling back to that at some point.
Yeah. So when it comes to digital, and I know because you are completely there, you talk about things I never heard before even. And I'm not very bad with digital, but you're way ahead of the curve. So when it comes to digital, and I know many start with that. What tips would you give them?
I think there's like a saying, like kind of like, how do you eat an elephant? And it's like bite by bite, like a small I know it's not a good saying, but the idea is like you have this sometimes it feels massive, like the learning curve, but it's like, okay, let's just start with one reasonable goal and let's just learn that one thing. And then
Yeah.
after I learn that one thing, then let's add another thing to it. That's the approach that I took, because I'm self-taught with a lot of that, like especially like 3D animation and things like that. And there's so much information and it can
Hmm.
feel overwhelming, but it's just learning one thing at a time. And then you look back and you've learned quite a few things, or you know enough. It just kind of reminds me of like with painting, it's like there's some painters that um they may never be able to like draw as realistic or like beautifully realistic as you do, but maybe they work with geometric shapes. Like they have like a different way of thinking about things and a different skill. Like you could copy them if you want to, but the point of it is the concept and the idea, and they have enough technique to really execute what they want to execute out of their work, even though they may not have your technical skills. And so I feel like it could be the same thing with technology. I work a lot with Blender, and with Blender,
Oh,
it's
yeah,
almost
I
like
know
a
that.
Swiss Army knife. You can do all kinds of things on Blender, but it's kind of like, you know what, instead of learning everything, let's just learn the things I need to know for
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
And then if I
yeah.
need to know that later, I can
Is
add.
Blender still open source?
Yes.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because I love that. You have
Yeah.
very expensive programs, and Blender is open source because I used it when I tried way back something to dabble in 3D animation. Yeah, yeah, great.
Yeah.
And you use the iPad too, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What's that? Procreate? Yeah,
Yep.
probably.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
like Procreate.
yeah. I have that, and I saw you can also do 3D on that. So they have
Mhm.
objects that are 3D, and you either paint on it directly or you copy and paste an image on it. You can do augmented reality with it, but
Mhm.
it is very minimal. But it is nice to look at it just to see what it actually means.
Yeah, that's true. Experiment a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Where can people find you? And I will put that in the show notes.
So you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, or Twitter at Leah Smithson Art. It's the same handle for all three.
Oh, okay.
And then also at leahsmithson.com.
Great. I put that in.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, definitely after that long time.